thanks so much for being with us. Oh, a rampage, tragedy, shooting, or bombing. These are just some of the top words used by the international mass media to describe the terrorist act which has taken place in Norway. And the tragedy on top of the tragedy seems to be the way the media initially covered this story. If the accused had been a Muslim, would the first headline still have read a tragedy, or would it have said terrorist act?
Police say the 32-year-old man, admitted to have been behind Norway's deadliest tragedy since World War II, is a Christian fundamentalist with records of posting anti-Muslim rhetoric online. He is also a former member of Norway's Progress Party and a self-identified admirer of anti-Islam Dutch politician Geert Wilders. In Norwegian politics, the Progress Party is famous for its tough immigration policies, deemed by many as racist.
Now, is there a difference in the way a news story is reported depending on who the victims are and who the perpetrators may be?
Well, I think it's very interesting that this is now being portrayed as an act of a madman, as if it's just some isolated individual. And I think it's important to say that this was a man who hated Muslims, hated multiculturalism, and hated the left, and he targeted indeed a camp of the left party in Norway. He was a Christian fundamentalist and was tied to neo-Nazi groups. This we all know. But I think we also have to say that there is a problem, and there's some mealy-mouthed words here. People are not saying openly this is a terrorist act by the far right. There has been a chain of such incidents in Europe, including in Scandinavia in the past. But more importantly, in my belief, this stems from the growth of anti-immigrant, anti-Islamic parties across Western Europe, which creates a climate in which hate and violence can grow. And we are seeing also a policy of exclusion of Islam from Western Europe, with a ban on the burqa in France and a number of other states and regions, the Swiss referendum and minarets. The idea that people should be excluded, Islamic people should be excluded from Europe, points towards genocidal racial politics. And I worry that a more general trend towards anti-migrant, anti-Islamic policies in Europe will lead to a development of this. And finally, I think it's important to say that the state did not pay enough attention to these far-right groups in Norway, but this is similar elsewhere. In Britain, where I come from, the current scandal over the Murdoch empire hacking into people's phones, one of the excuses of the police why they could not investigate that was their concentration was on so-called Islamic terrorism. Therefore, there is one key focus of Western policy for over 10 years, a war on terror, with Islamophobia as a central policy of that. There has been an ignorance of this far-right development. And we are seeing actually people unable to deal with the fact this is a homegrown, fascist, Christian fundamentalist terrorist, obviously working with others, and it says something about what is happening in Western Europe and Norway. This act has become, and it's deplorable and disgusting and tragic, but we have to say it stems from policies which are endemic across Western Europe.
Now, Mr. Rushton, how do you see it? You're in London. Do you agree with our guests in Rome? Is this a result of the post-9/11 way that Islam and Muslims have been portrayed?
Yes, well, as far as this individual is concerned, we don't yet know to what extent he was involved with other people. We don't yet know to what extent his political involvement drew him into a broader terrorist conspiracy. And this extreme apocalyptic rhetoric that we've seen in the last decade or so about a clash of civilizations and other such things, this apocalyptic Islamophobia that has spread throughout Western Europe and the United States, and which has been spread not just by not by extremist parties so much as by mainstream journalists and mainstream academics. People like Geert Wilders, who this terrorist was said to admire, is somebody close to the political mainstream in his country. The party that this man was a member of in Norway is close to the political mainstream and shares much of the outlook of the political mainstream in relation to that clash of civilizations and in relation to its close alignment with Zionism, as we were hearing earlier on. It seems to me that if apocalyptic rhetoric is promoted, if an association with a genocidal program, such as the particular extreme varieties of Zionist that some Western politicians are happy to associate with, such as Wilders, if that sort of thing becomes mainstream, then it's no surprise if someone further down the line, even if it turns out that this man, in terms of this particular action, didn't actually associate with other people in planning this particular action, the climate in which it was inspired is quite clearly one to which a number of people have contributed, and to which a number of people very close to the political, academic and media mainstream have contributed.
Now, Mr. Ledman, with this individual killing over 90 people by shooting them and bombing them, why wouldn't this act initially be called a terror act? Now, we are seeing more and more sites and newspapers and also broadcast entities now starting to use the word terrorist. But initially, the word, when describing this individual, it was not used terrorist. However, they did use it when they thought that perhaps there were Muslims behind this act.
Well, I have written about numerous attacks, numerous individuals, numerous ones that were magically foiled before they happened, numerous ones that were committed. Every single time, I've written about dozens of these. Every single time, the initial accounts, the official accounts, turned out to be wrong, falsified. Later evidence showed the real story was much different. I find it very hard to believe one man, I don't care what he was armed with, managed to kill 91 people before he was stopped. That's almost an impossibility. It has never before happened, but yet supposedly one man did this. Was it one man? Did he have accomplices? Were they hidden shooters? There's a great line. My English guests will appreciate this. There's a great line from Gilbert and Sullivan's HMS Pinafore. Things aren't always as they seem. Skim milk masquerades as cream. Can I cite an example? The London Guardian quoted a Norwegian police official saying, "This looks more like Oklahoma City, 1995, than World Trade Center." Oklahoma City, I wrote about it today. I have a brand new article I'll put out tomorrow. I featured Oklahoma City in it. The original account was two terrorists, homegrown, blowing up the federal building. The real story was there was a truck bomb. Maybe these people did it. Maybe they did not. But the real story was a brigadier general, an expert in munitions and armaments, conducted a study at a weapons laboratory at Elgin Air Force Base, and he concluded, and this has never come out in the mainstream media, he concluded it was impossible for this truck bomb to do the damage it did. How was it done? The building was rigged on the inside with multiple explosives done by experts, undetected. Something was rotten in Oklahoma City. I think something is rotten in Oslo. We don't know who is behind this, what the motives are. I have lots of suspicions.
What are you saying, Mr.
24 hours since it happened.
What are you saying exactly? You have lots of suspicions. Can we talk about at least one of them? What exactly are you saying when you're saying that it's similar to Oklahoma City and that Oklahoma City was not what it initially appeared? What exactly are you saying here?
Well, I think there are two motives behind all of these attacks. One of them in general is to stoke fear, to let government justify its policies. In the case of Norway, it's pulling out of Libya, but it's a NATO member. It's got a token force in Afghanistan. It supports Western imperial wars, not the way Britain and France do, but it supports them. And another reason, maybe this time, is Norway is very supportive of Palestinian rights. Very possibly, there are right-wing extremists behind this. Karl Rove has made a number of visits to Norway in recent weeks. It could be that there are right-wing extremists who plan this attack to soften the criticism of Israel, to soften the support of the Norwegian government for Israel, for a Palestinian UN full membership, de jure membership. It could be that they want to turn Norway around, take its soft approach, make it a harder approach, more pro-Israel, less pro-Palestinian. Very possibly this is part of it. But I will say emphatically that later on we will find out that the original story, the official story, turns out to be false. It has holes in it, and we will learn the truth later, but it could be months from now when the story has long disappeared from the news. The one thing I'll leave with viewers is be very skeptical of everything that comes out in the official major media, the corporate media, the BBC, the U.S. corporate media, the major newspapers. Be very skeptical of them.
Okay.
Doubt everything. Do your own research. Do it online and find out real facts.
How likely that the situation, the way it is initially appearing out of Oslo, is not really what it is?
Well, I think you have to say that there has been a growth of anti-immigrant parties across Scandinavia, in Finland, Sweden and Denmark. And therefore the climate that's been created in these countries is one of extreme Islamophobia and combined with anti-migrant policies. And this is a cocktail which we're seeing elsewhere in Europe. For instance, here in Italy, in the local elections, Silvio Berlusconi warned that if people voted for the opposition in Milan, they would turn it into an Islamic city, there would be Roma, gypsy ghettos in the city, and it would be swamped by migrants. You bring a cocktail of Islamophobia and anti-migrant racism together, and it creates the grounds on this can happen. And actually, in Europe, we've seen a plethora of different cases like this. In Britain, regularly, right-wing extremists, neo-Nazis, are arrested with explosives, weapons, and so on. It gets no headlines. However, if a young Muslim was arrested with explosives or one bullet, it gets a headline. And I think we have to say there has been a growth of right-wing, far-right Nazi violence in Europe. Attacks on migrants, attacks on the Roma. Here in Italy, in Hungary, across Eastern Europe. And that climate creates these things. So I think we do have to address what the politics are in Western Europe and Eastern Europe at the moment. And there's a growth of Islamophobia, tied, of course, to the war in Afghanistan, the war that happened in Iraq, and the current war in Libya, and a wave of anti-migrant policy. And the two things are combined. Over the question of the war in Libya, it's led to a refugee crisis, and that has led to further scares that, ironically, of course, it's a humanitarian war, supposedly, in Libya on behalf of the Libyan people. But at the same time, a scare about refugees from Libya entering Europe. And that is essentially bringing the two things together, Islamophobia and migrants, because these are Islamic refugees. And this is where I think we should be addressing. There is something rotten at the heart of Western European politics, and it's about this anti-migrant racism and this Islamophobia, which has been the centre now for over a decade, following the launch of the war against terror, against 9/11. And we see nothing about the violence. So, for instance, fascist groups in Hungary regularly attacking Roma and regularly attacking migrants. Or here in Italy.
Rupert Murdoch's newspaper, The Sun, headlined with Al-Qaeda massacre, Norway's 9/11. What's your take on that?
Yes, well, that's very typical, you see, of the corrupt relationship, the morally corrupt relationship, even when it's not financially corrupt, between the popular press, particularly the Murdoch press, and the establishment parties. Those parties are quite happy to have the distraction of some theoretical enormous Muslim threat, some clash of civilizations to be talked about, and for people to blame all of their troubles on some Islamic conspiracy.